Thank you very much. Thank you for being still here, even though it's third day of this intense conference. Indeed, my name is Katarzyna Szymielewicz. My main affiliation is what you can see here, Panoptykon Foundation, the place based in Poland, non-governmental organization where we test different strategies of confronting, curbing, limiting surveillance. But I will not talk about our work today. You can look it up online if you want. I will actually tell you one story, the story about our digital profile, how this can be created even without our awareness and control, how this can gain quite a real life to the extent it becomes independent from us, and maybe sometimes turn against us in the sense that some people will give more credibility to our profile than they give to ourselves. So I hope it will be interesting. To set you in the right mood for this story, I decided to bring Michael Douglas. Anybody has seen The Game? I expected it's not the most popular movie in this crowd, but well, it's a Hollywood picture, and still it's supposed to be thriller. But if you do see it, you might discover it's quite a real account of what is already happening to us in the context of online profiling. Just the impact on our lives as we experience. It is a bit less spectacular than what he receives. The main hero in this movie actually loses a lot of money. He is forced to move from one of the big Western cities to a shantytown somewhere south. He is in life danger, all because he starts a game of profiling with a company that is trying to, well, surprise him and guess the most exciting things he might want, well, to have a better life. So it's a kind of trap in which we might fall, not knowing what exactly the internet has in stake for us. And I will give you some examples. Maybe you will find them more thrilling than what you expect looking at your own online profile today. But even those of you who haven't seen The Game probably have heard about the smart TV affair. So the media internationally discovered that most of the smart TV producers, like Samsung, but not only, they actually use the cameras built in the TV sets to observe what we do, not only when we watch the TV and not only when it's really necessary for providing us the interactive service. It was all thought to improve the service and learn what the client might want. But in fact, when people learned that, they felt at least awkward. I will leave it to your imagination to think what kind of sensitive data could be collected by having that thing working around the clock, and how this data could be used in the market game with some serious consequences for us. So, but even if you cannot imagine these consequences and the use of this data, I bet there is one company that does imagine and maybe even has an algorithm to analyze this sort of data. And that's obviously Google, that comes forward with this concept of guessing what we might not yet know about ourselves and predicting our next step even if we don't ask. To be honest, when I hear things like this quote from Eric Schmidt, it almost rings a bell of Donald Rumsfeld and his unknown knowns. It's that scary to me. But of course, Google sells this as a form of, not as oppression, but as a service, as a very unique, very personal, very comfortable service offered to us, busy people in an online environment who might not have time to think. Well, is this really the case? I mean, in my opinion, and I hope I don't have to convince you, thinking actually works for our benefit. And if we trust companies with thinking for us and guessing what we might want best or what is the most useful option, we might end up in a situation of huge power imbalance. I mean, you've heard many talks today and over the last 2 days about profiling, about data. You know all these things. All I'm trying to say now is that we think of the next step. So about the consequences of the situation in which somebody really knows better things that we don't know about us, and we'll start using this not exactly to our benefit. And that's basically the point I will try to make. But before we go to consequences part, let me stop with the first step, so how the profiles are created. Quite often I do hear in all meetings I go to, that it's all fine because we clients actually share only things that we choose to share. So in the first place, we are those who create profiles and have full control over this process. I'm not convinced, really, and let me give you some ideas why I'm not convinced. So just looking at Facebook, which is still probably the most dominant social media space, if you look back, 2005, how this started, the privacy policy was strikingly different than what we have now. And they were promising interesting things. They were promising that no personal information that we submit to Facebook will be available to any user of the website who does not belong to our groups. So that sounded reasonable. And maybe back then I would even decide that this is a good way of communicating with the world if I can control my information to that extent. But that was 2005. In 2007, they already said something important. They added unless. So they made it very clear that the default setting of Facebook will not work to your advantage, will actually expose your information unless you come and say no. So for many users, that's imaginable, that I go through the settings and I change them. For probably the majority in Facebook knows that it's not so easy, so nobody deals with it. Then we move to the third parties. Anybody who ever used Facebook knows that it's exposing users to third parties. All the games, all the extra things are actually provided by other companies. And these other companies, they get all the data that you provide. So Facebook became clear about that in 2010, saying, well, be aware. I'm not sure how many people really have read this with understanding and are aware, but at least they said it. But now, that's the current policy. Have a look at the title. It's no longer privacy policy. Facebook sort of came clean about privacy not being the buzzword. It's data policy, and it's data sharing policy. So what they say here is that even if you don't choose other companies or providers, we will actually share things for you. We will share them within the Facebook family of companies, not disclosing too many details about who is in the family. But we will also use all the information that we have about you to show you the relevant ads. And it's very difficult to stop that process. So this year, it became really clear that we are the product here, and we either accept it or we leave. Well, after so many years, I acknowledge it must be difficult to leave for people who build their profiles, professional or personal, in that space. If you add to this something that Facebook calls the real name policy, which they try to execute quite efficiently, so they are forcing people to reveal their real identities. And what you know, obviously everybody here knows that it's not just data collected within the website, right? It's a data collected on every website when you see Facebook button, Facebook like, Facebook whatever plugin, and that's huge majority of websites. If I'm not mistaken, it's like 18 million by now. Then you can imagine that the wealth of data collected without your control and shared beyond your choices is actually quite scary. It gets even more difficult for me when I realize that there are all these great apps and really useful services like Khan Academy, which I respect for many reasons, that start cooperating with services like Facebook. They also do this because in their business model, it makes sense. It makes sense to know slightly more about clients. It makes sense to offer to teachers or students stuff which is profiled on the basis of social media profiles. So it's difficult to blame them. But again, by doing so, they are forcing us as users of this app to become more open or more vulnerable to places like Facebook. And then comes Google that provides different services, including educational applications. Probably most of you are not in school any longer, not right now, maybe your kids are, but you will discover, if you start researching that many teachers go for Google Apps. Why they do so? Again, it's useful. It really works. It's for free, I mean out of charge from the teacher's perspective. The only disadvantage is that it sells data. But many teachers don't really realize this backlash. So we end up having whole communities sold to Google and its business model. Moving back to us and our experience, day-to-day experience, of course, you know that loyalty cards exist. I don't expect many of you is using them. But if you think of the majority of the world, that kind of thing can be very practical because food is becoming very expensive. And even if that's not a major problem in Berlin or other major cities, it is a growing problem globally. So people have strong incentive to get into this kind of relationship with a grocery provider, so to say, because it's a basic need they have to satisfy for them, for their families. And then with the loyalty card come very interesting information. On the basis of this information, as this quote shows, the company that has the loyalty card can obviously have impact on the behavior of the customer. So it's not only knowing, it's being able to act upon that knowledge. And the second quote shows how valuable this information is from the perspective of the providers. Both these quotes come from the Guardian and from UK-based chains like Tesco, but it's basically the same practice everywhere you go. So what do? They not only incentivize their clients by saying it will be cheaper, they actually target people who are more wealthy as well by saying, we will offer you healthy options. We will offer you options that are in line with your lifestyle or your consumer style, your style of consumption. And by doing so, they actually increase the potential base of people who will go in the loyalty card thing. And then, if you think of the type of services, I already mentioned that I believe food is pretty essential. But many people believe that banking or insurance is even more essential. We are being taught in the society we live in that without financial services, we are in trouble. We have to take loans, we have to buy things, we have to get insured because we live in a risky environment. And that all feeds into what is my main point here, that our choice to share data is less and less a choice, really, is more and more some sort of oppression or extortion of information based on a positive incentive in the first place. So this is the perfect example of the positive incentive. It's real. It's an insurance company that wants to know slightly more about their clients, and they offer a serious discount on the insurance premium only if the client provides health-related data. It only takes one little trendy fitness tracker, nothing really big. If somebody doesn't have that thinking that I hope we all have here, they actually might be seduced into this deal. Well, look at that list. I don't know how many of you can immediately read what is this. If you can, maybe you raise your hand to let me know how quick your understanding is. For me, it wasn't obvious when I saw it first time. So that's the list of 11 simple steps you can take to increase your chances of getting a credit or a loan. And it might be confusing, right? It says, get a credit card, but underuse your cards. Become authorized users or share more data, but, well, mix it up, so probably create different profiles. Pay your bills on time, but don't pay them, but pay them twice a month. So, you know, it's getting complicated. And you may think it's ridiculous. It's just advice from Forbes, so you might not really see this as trustworthy. But that already shows a certain way of thinking, which will become more and more prevalent, I'm afraid, where the extortion of positive information, or not even positive, but information we share, and we even try to guess the tactics in which we should be sharing, becomes a market standard. Why? Because we feel that we are competing for goods that are more and more expensive or less and less available, like financial services. If you think one step further, you will soon realize that whatever is the profile created about you within a certain context, that profile may well travel much further. And again, I refer to the only research I could find. It's a US Federal Trade Commission, but I'm quite sure the same results we would see in Europe, regardless of our high data protection standards. They studied 18 mobile health apps, and they found that 12 out of those, of course, is sharing your profile, the very sensitive stuff that you reveal by your sleeping patterns or running patterns or whatever calories you burn, with 76 third parties. they don't specify who is this, but I can well think that there might be insurers in this bubble, or potential employers, or somebody like that. And the interesting bit is what is said by Joy Pritz from the FTC, that it's going to be harder and harder, even for the regulator, to differentiate what is health, what is not health. Because things that used to be neutral, like my walking pace or something, might become easily health data, and if analyzed in connection with other data I provide, might become very, very sensitive. And the same goes for educational apps that I mentioned before. Google has been found, and even well, didn't lose, settled, that's the practice they go for, a lawsuit for selling student data to advertisers. But it's not just Google, it's basically everybody in the business of educational apps who thinks of that second step, to whom I can sell the profile once it's created, because it's so attractive. Why? Well, we can see. So my point is that this profile detaches from us and gains something I call real life. Real life to the extent that it becomes independent from who we really are, and can become a very well, reliable or credible to others, to the extent it's more reliable than our own opinions or declarations. I will start with an easy case study from Madrid that you might know already, because it's not a new thing. More than a year ago, Madrid introduced a new payment system for parking, where they clearly punish car owners who chose cheaper cars. At least that's the assumption, that they are cheaper, but they pollute more. So if you have a car that pollutes more, is cheaper for you, you will pay more for a parking slot. Well, my first impression was, that goes far, but then I thought, well, car is not a person. Actually, the deal is clear. I make the decision. Maybe it's not outrageous, but that logic applied by City of Madrid is applied increasingly by many public service providers, by many governors across the globe, and not always the correlation between the source of the problem, so the pollution, and the solution, like, or the characteristic of the polluting thing, in this case a car, is so clear, right? So we come to the problem of causation, where you can clearly say that certain characteristic increases a certain problem or a risk of a problem, or it should be punished or it should be judged accordingly. And you might find it very worrying that some bureaucrats, like this one, Michael Flowers, the former chief analytics officer for New York City, actually don't see problem with lack of causation, right? They see the problem they want to solve, and they want to sell it to the public by showing we do something. And by basing a public policy on correlation between certain characteristic and a problem, they actually go quite smooth. They don't have to explain all these complex social issues. They say, we have high risk of crime, and we have new surveillance cameras. There might be no correlation, but we want to show that we do something. And that attitude, actually, for me, is quite scary. And if we move from things like parking to things far more important for people, like social benefits, it gets even more scary. I don't think you will guess what that map shows, so I will tell you. That's the map of Poland. It's actually the results of the survey that we did at Panoptykon Foundation. The survey was about unemployed people who, by the Polish state, get categorized into 3 categories based on their profiles. It's not digital profile, it's a profile that they create on the basis of active interview with the unemployed. But as a result, you end up in one of the 3 categories. The first is the best, because it shows that you have high risk of being re-employed and the state will help you. The second is problematic, because the state has to invest a lot according to its own opinion, of course. It might be not your opinion at all. So it decreases your chances of being re-employed. The third is the ridiculous one. It basically says that you are so hopeless that the state will not even try to help you, and they will move you to the social benefit walk, where you just get some social benefit, but that's it. And if you look at the map, you will see that the places which are with the high rate means the high rate of the third category, so the people who were marginalized and deemed not employable. These are the regions in my country that are the poorest, the most economically disadvantaged. So you can clearly see that the state policy is actually reinforcing the pattern and is not helping where the help is really needed. And that's all based on profiling and not on the real assessment of the situation. You might think, okay, I'm not unemployed, I don't live in Poland, I'm lucky. But, well, you might be employed, but you might want to change your employment one day, and you might want to be on the market. Then you have to think how your potential new employer will judge you, who they will be judging, you or your profile. Again, goes without saying that Facebook became a major source of information for potential employers, and we have a lot of data, like even this piece of research, showing how big percentage of employers already seek data on Facebook. But of course, it's not Facebook. Facebook is just the tip of the iceberg here. We have a number of applications. I could go on for all 30 minutes just showing you different applications that check your background, check your profile, and help in the recruitment process. There's quite a lot of that. But the interesting part, again, is that we start cooperating. So more and more people find it necessity or a rational choice to actually share this data themselves. So this is the same mechanism as with the banking, insurance, or loyalty card. I find that incentive positive enough to start playing the game. And I don't exactly know what will be the result for me because I don't understand the algorithm and the logic behind it. You may think, okay, that's for the objective skills, I don't know, age, maybe the place of origin, maybe language skills. What about the soft skills, the emotional intelligence, my way of dealing with problems? They start finding solutions even for those. That's a very interesting example from the Guardian study, where they analyzed the voices, male and female, which sounds more reliable or attractive when it says, greet me if I'm a new customer? Greet me as if I'm a new customer. Well, never mind what it said, but of course it's about customer service. And for me, that discovery was kind of threatening. Okay, so the serious consequences of this game that we enter voluntarily or under pressure, or we enter unconsciously because somebody shares information for us. The serious consequences of reduction to profiles can be actually very, very far-reaching. That thing is the easy start. So is the errors. The fact that the system is not perfectly reliable, and you will know that it's intuitive and it's also based on serious research, that we have many problems with statistics, correlations, and profiling, and the most rare is the characteristic that somebody is looking for, be that employer or be that a police officer, the higher is the risk of errors. But I took here only something quite straightforward, credit scoring. Credit scoring being the system that I guess everybody encounters once or twice in life. And we would think it's easy to get it right. Not really. If you look at the study, again, by the FTC, 20% of traditional credit reports had errors, and 5% of credit reports contained errors that could result in a lower credit score. So if the system cannot really handle something that straightforward as whether I can pay back my loan on the basis of my salaries, it can get much more complicated when we think of security environment, where police is trying to profile us on the basis of such ridiculous things like our PNR being passenger name records profile. In UK, 47,000 innocent people were profiled on the basis of their flying patterns and the information they provide when they book their flights for security purposes. Don't ask me what was read out of this information. I would bet something not very useful. But the fact is that just by flying with a plane on a certain line, we get exposed to profiling, so we become suspects. And if you happen to live in Newark and you belong to Muslim community, then you will, that's a very famous study done by New York police, you will find yourself being subject to very specific research when they look at your patterns of consumption, they look at the map of Islamic institutions, hoping they will read something interesting, just analyzing that kind of information. So that's, I would say, clear outright discrimination that is increasing with the profiling as a new logic for providing or not providing certain services, or for being a suspect or not being a suspect of police activity. And it's not just New York, of course. We have a very interesting report that I recommend to everybody by OSF, a study of stop and search practices in Paris. You can easily guess who was the most affected community. Don't ask me why, because there is no clear reason. And again, we are back to the market where we all belong to. We have heard about discriminatory practices of increasing the prices for certain products. We've spoke many times about flights. It's problematic. Many studies didn't confirm that flights get more expensive according to your devices, but there are studies confirming that other products get more expensive according to the device you use. And it's certainly just the beginning of experiments that we will see with this, and the beginning of more and more serious experiments. Again, the FTC has audited the banking sector, and it clearly says there is evidence that location of you is being used as a proxy for your ability to repay a debt. That really sounds like redlining, something that was very popular in US in the 60s and 70s, where many services would not be offered to people living in certain districts because these districts were associated with poverty and basically black people living there. That was the case. We thought it's far behind us. We will never come back to this thinking. Here we go. Location, again, becomes a proxy for important things like your creditworthiness. Finally, that's my last example, maybe the most far-reaching one, but I want to show you where we can end up. It's a study, well, not really a study, that's a Facebook site, America Votes 2012. I guess you know what it is, right? There was a famous case of Facebook being used in order to increase the number of people who show up for voting in US. How was it done? Facebook had a campaign, internal campaign, targeting people on the basis of the profiles in order to encourage them to vote. It was done because somebody thought that these young people are more likely to vote for Obama than the other one. And it's not proven. We don't know what would be the result of that vote if it hadn't been for that campaign. But clearly, that's the first known and well-researched example of the use of digital profiles in order to influence political campaign. So the question I will leave you with is basically, do we really want algorithms to decide for us? Remembering it's not just about our individual choices. It's also coming back to the frame of this year's Republica, Finding Europe. It is all a discussion about what kind of legal regulation we expect from Europe towards private companies that do these things, and also what kind of values or goals we set for our governments, for agencies that provide unemployment benefits and things like that. What we expect from them? Do we really expect that profit and efficiency will be the main values, or do we want to come back to things like freedom? Because if we want, that's not really the way we should be going forward. Thank you so much.
So we actually have a 15-minute break in this room, but if you have any questions, we could take a couple.
I'm also around, so if you want to grab me for a conversation here or later, I'm more than happy.
Maybe.